Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Key, where we discuss ways to unlock efficiencies for your teams on the road. My name is Lee Adam, and I'm a mobility consultant and a vehicle reimbursement expert here at Cardata. This is the podcast that dives into the strategy behind company mobility benefits. So this is really the ultimate podcast for cross-functional thought leaders working to optimize efficiencies and ensure a modern approach to field team enablement. We want to keep employees happy, streamline costs, and spearhead company growth. That's the key. So let's buckle in. Today, we're going to be posing the question, is your company fit for hire? So in today's ever-changing talent climate, companies really need to ask themselves, how are they leveraging HR technology and market data to both acquire and retain A-plus field talent, and then keep their business practices really ahead of the curve? So with that being said, today I am joined by Tim Sackett, a man who is really at the forefront of technical HR leadership that we're really excited to chat with. He's an author, a top 10 global HR influencer. So Tim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. That's a great introduction. I'm glad to be here and excited about the topics.
Good. Yeah, we're so excited. We're really excited to hear your unique insights about this particular group, right? And I really want to start to hear a breakdown from your experience about the differences between traditional HR management and HR hiring practices for back office roles, right? Those who are really working in a corporate environment where they're maybe working remotely or working from office. And then those of us who visit accounts every day, or who are in field labor or field work, who are driving to visit clients. So how would you compare the difference between basic HR hiring practices in those two unique situations?
I think part of it for us is the vast majority of people we're going to hire is in this kind of traditional capacity of, you go through and, somebody comes on a laptop or a desktop and they're going to apply through and they're going to go through the interview process. And we've all seen that.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that for generations. The field hiring, to me, has always been so different because I think the biggest thing we have to really do is understand is, one is we're constantly creating field talent, right? Because it's not something, no one grows up and goes, oh, I'm just going to be on the road. Sometimes it happens right out of college, but we don't know if you're going to be good at it. I actually went from a traditional role to a field role. And it was one of those things that it took me, I bet, a year to get used to, because I was so, the field job never leaves you. It's a 24/7 job that you're constantly, it seems like because you have the ultimate flexibility, you also have the ultimate responsibility. And to me, that becomes so difficult. And it took me a year to understand, hey, it's okay to go and pick up my kid off the bus at 3:00 because I'm also the guy at 9 p.m. who's responding to emails on the West Coast.
Right.
It's just the reality. But so I think part of that, in that attraction hiring process, you almost have to put people into that life and then see how they react even at the beginning, right? I remember interviewing with Applebee's and they were like, hey, it was 9 hours out on the road interviewing at restaurants. And then we went to dinner and it was 11 o'clock before I got, but they really wanted to know your capacity of being on.
Right.
Because when you're in the field, you're on. You have to come in and you have to go in, whether it's retail or restaurants or anything you do, you're constantly on until you're not. And so having somebody prove that, I think, is probably the most difficult, because so often, somebody would say, oh gosh, I want this job. And then it would just burn them out. They would fail so quickly because they don't understand what that is,
Yeah. Oh my God. Such a good point. I like that you mentioned not everybody kind of grows up and says, oh, I want to be on the road all the time. But then there's a certain person who absolutely thrives in that environment.
Yeah.
But then those who don't or need additional enablement. And I think it's interesting that you say flexibility is both perhaps a challenge, but also a gift that comes with some of these jobs. And in your experience working, you mentioned at Applebee's, but also enabling some members on the road, I think that's a really unique perspective to have. Now, How do you suggest from your experience, and perhaps you can share some anecdotes? How do you suggest that HR leaders approach hiring and retaining practices in the context of on the road employees? Right, because you mentioned there has to be an element of flexibility, and that it's just uniquely a little bit different than these other
Yeah.
roles. So how do you approach HR leaders just begin thinking about this?
It is difficult. So I think part of it is trying to get HR people out on the road so they can experience that themselves a little bit, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like and so being a great kind of business partner, everybody in HR wants to be an HR business partner, but they don't really understand what that means. Some like half the time it's like, oh well, I just have conversations with the people I support. It's like, no, you need to walk in their shoes, right? Like when I remember the first time I ever worked at a big health system, I was in a hospital and I'm hiring RNs. I had literally went from Applebee's hiring bartenders and cooks and dishwashers to hiring nurses,
Mm-hmm.
and they were just like, you are going to fail, there's no way you can do this. And going out into the hospital and walking the floor with a nursing manager, going into the rooms of patients and being so freaked out by that, like, oh my god, I didn't want to like do anything where I would hurt anybody, or and they pulled me in the hall and they're like, hey, when you go in, we want you to touch the patient, like put your hand on their arm and ask how they're doing, like that calms them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, I'm the HR guy. Like I shouldn't be touching anybody. There's people who are way better at this than me. But they're just like, but that walking in their shoes and understanding most of their job was caring for these people and making them feel comfortable. If you're in the field and you're going out in the operation side and seeing that you show up, you have to understand immediately the people you're going to see are a little on edge,
Right.
right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, why are they here? And what did I do wrong? And it's all the negative stuff. And so an HR person understanding that, you, especially HR coming in, like you're now carrying, like you're the grim reaper, like who they're going to fire, who screwed up. And you're just like, no, I'm here to support you in your development, and let's have this conversation. But if they only see you like once a year, like they're never going to have that comfort. So it's like, how do you sustain that? How do you get out there and get on the road and go see them? And for them, it's, the people that are out in the field, like that becomes a big deal because they go like, finally, I have somebody who supports me, right? That. My life a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. I think there's sometimes such a unique disconnect between those who create programs for their field employees and then those who are actually in the field living it. Like you mentioned, being in front of patients, being in front of scared
Yeah.
clients or nervous people, right? If you're in field service, you're in field sales, right? The context is different, but understanding that context is so key. And
Yeah.
you mentioned like their life, their day to day, and being able to say, as an HR person, I understand what they're going through, their lifestyle. It better equips you to provide them tools, benefits, technology to make their life easier and retain them if you know that and you're rooted in
The
understanding.
biggest failure we make as HR people is, and this happens consistently and it happens way too often, is we design a program and we spend all this time and energy, effort, resources, design this big giant program that we think is going to help. And maybe for 20% of the people, immediately it will
Mm-hmm.
help. But there's a lot of others that it won't. And and then we do it all at once. So it's like, okay, hey, we did all of this stuff. Starting Monday, we're going to jam this new program on the field. And almost always it fails. And we're sitting there going, we spent all this time, and they get angry and they're like, the field doesn't get it. And there's always this combative relationship.
Right.
Instead of, like, what I love to do in this role, and what we did consistently and had a lot of success with, was we took it like really from like technology and software, and we did a lot of testing, right? We would go, hey, with one location or with one leader in the field, we want to try something, and usually with somebody who's in a lot of pain that needs change or wants change, and let's just try it with you. And if it fails, it was just a test, and we'll reiterate, we'll come back, we'll try a different one, right? We'll keep doing it till we find
Right.
something that's successful. And then what happens is, like, the other people see this going on, and they will come back and go, hey, wait a minute, can we try that, right? Can we do that? And now they're asking, right, for your help. They're asking for the thing that you're trying to do, versus feeling like something's happening to them, which constantly was something. Is something that we were really good at Applebee's, where on a quarterly basis we would constantly come into the corporate office, and like we had to come in and tell them of something we were testing.
Mm.
Here's something we're doing. And it didn't have to be about people, right? It could have been an operational test, could have been a marketing test, could have been whatever. But as a group of leaders in the field, we had to come and share, this is the thing we tested. Here's the measurable results. It could have been good or bad, didn't matter, but we tried something. But then we also had 12 other regions who were telling the same thing. And we would constantly like, oh my gosh, I love that idea, but I want to tweak it. I want to change it a little bit and come out. It was the idea of testing constantly that the field leadership got really good at, because they were never felt like, well, we just can't do anything.
Right.
Like corporate isn't allowing us to do anything. It was like, no, no, no. Corporate wants you to test. Corporate desires that you go out and try stuff and find something that's going to work better. But what they didn't desire was permanent change for the sake of change. You know?
Yeah, it's such a unique point. I think change in and of itself is scary, right? Especially when you've done something the same way for a long time. We see
Yeah.
it all the time. Individuals, organizations who are like, hey, this new HR technology, this new approach, this new operational cadence sounds great, but we're scared. We're scared to do
Yeah.
it. So from your perspective, and I wanted to take a couple minutes just to talk about change management, and then
Yeah.
because I think from your particular experience with testing, you mentioned going through and doing things quarterly. That's a lot more consistent than a lot of leaders are doing
Oh, yeah.
testing
Yeah.
and approaching these elements. So what's your
Yeah.
perspective on dealing with the change aspects that are sometimes necessary when you have a positive test? You're like, well, shoot, I better implement this. It's gonna be good for the company.
Yeah, when I first got into it, it was stressful because you were constantly under this timeline of creating something and testing and figuring out if it would work or not. And it could have been, I mean, super small things. Like one of our tests was literally at lunchtime in an Applebee's. Like you have like a brownie dessert,
Yeah.
right? It's probably like $6-7, whatever. And we said most people coming from like a lunch from business, they don't want a big dessert. They just want their salad and a soda, and they want to go back to the office, whatever. But how many people just want a little taste of something sweet? And we like literally we said, what if we cut the brownie in four, put a little tiny scoop of ice cream, sold it for $1, just put it around on like super fast, right? And we sold literally like hundreds of thousands of dollars of these stupid little $1 desserts at lunch. It was just a test to see, like, for that's all guest check average. How do you get it? One more dollar is incrementally so much, it's like, this huge thing. But the stress of the change management for us, all of a sudden, we just became part of what you did. Whether we like it or not, every organization is under constant change. And what we did was systemize the change. We felt like we were in control of the change. Instead of change happening to us, we were the change agents. And so after I got into it and was a part of it for a while, like all of a sudden I didn't feel that stress. It was more of the anxiousness of like, oh my gosh, what can we do now? And once in a like, and you would feel a little bit of like anxiousness going into that meeting of saying what's next, because nobody knew. But then as you started to throw all the ideas on the table, you were like, oh gosh, like there's unlimited things we can do. Let's just pick one. The stress became, what do we do next, right? From that standpoint.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think there's a lot of noise right now for leaders to say, okay, I'm hearing buzzwords. I'm hearing AI. I'm hearing optimization. I'm hearing capital cost, reallocation. I'm hearing all these things. And how do I pick, right? How do I choose where to go? So from your perspective, how do companies deal with the noise of the market while also effectively looking internally to make sure that they're benchmarking and they understand that their policies, their tech stack, their practices are measuring up to standards?
What I found was that, like, especially in the field roles, is like the field's so close to the customer, whoever your customer is, they see and hear and know the change coming before anybody at the corporate side, right? But so often organizationally, we wait for top down kind of like, change direction to come, or vision, or whatever that might be. And I think, the settings I've been in that have worked the best is when, again, it was either the leaders going out into the field and being a part of that to understand and really, like listening to what's going on and directing that change. But so often what we found was the leaders didn't necessarily have to direct the change. What they wanted to know was that the field was aware of change and they were doing something about the change. And so as long as we were communicating up and we were keeping everybody in the loop, like they were like, this is amazing. Like these people are taking control and they're doing something, whether it was the right thing or not. Like, again, back to the testing aspect, we were aware and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do to combat or better or whatever that might be. And so I think part of that is becoming really, really good at managing up at what's going on
Right.
versus waiting for someone to go, hey, do you understand that we just had a margin drop over the last 3 months? And we're like, yeah, we saw it 6 months ago. We've been trying to change it, but then nobody was talking and telling like, hey, we've seen this and here's what we're doing. Even if it's sometimes super early where someone goes, well, slow down. We have some marketing plans in place. Like that's going to have, that'll have an impact. Like, don't worry. Like at least you're communicating up. And so often you just don't see that like kind of bi-directional communication
Right.
happening.
Yeah, it's so true. There's a lot of top down these days, but I think what I'm hearing from you is it's really positive and saying, hey guys, there's so much knowledge in the field. Like the amount of touch points that these people have with their customers, their people is just way above. It's essentially your own internal market research team that you have, right? And not leveraging that on a consistent basis is a waste of resources, a waste of really valuable resources. People who are just have a plethora of knowledge. In your perspective, for somebody who doesn't have this laid out, who doesn't have a solid foundation of communication with their field team, who perhaps doesn't have strong internal policies with regards to collecting information and making this something that's very standardized. How do you suggest that they approach getting cross-functional alignment to have something standardized where they can say, okay, on a consistent basis, we're gonna look at this and do some tests?
Yeah, I think sometimes people in the corporate office also don't necessarily feel welcome in the field. So for me, it was inviting people and giving them time. It wasn't like, hey, Wednesday, I'm going to be taking a trip. Like, you should come with me. It was like, hey, it's July. In August, we have this thing. We're going to do this road trip. We're going to go see some locations. Would love to have you come out. Give them time to actually schedule. And then, you don't have to put on the dog and pony show, but like have a reason, the reason why I want to have maybe our marketing leader come out or maybe our finance leader come out, and we're going to show them some things that are happening and why. And by the way, we're also going to say, hey, we have some ideas we want to try. What I find is leadership is really like acceptable. That's like, they're like, one is like, this is amazing. They just had a day in the field, got to really see what was going on, but they also feel confident that my field team actually knows it, understands it, has some things they want to do with it. But when you invite them to come out, they're like, these people aren't hiding anything. When they're just sitting back in the office and they're not hearing anything, there's always this thing in the back of the head of like, I'm not sure what's going on. Are they hiding something? Because I'm looking at all this data and the numbers, and sometimes the data and numbers are telling one story or can be interpreted in one story, but it's not necessarily the reality that the field is feeling,
Right.
right? And so it's so important, I think, to like, do that. And again, you don't have to like say, oh, once a quarter I'm going to do this or whatever. Like, and again, invite different people, like people that you normally wouldn't,
Right.
like supply chain sometimes or whatever that might be. Like, try to get people who normally wouldn't go in the field, because what you're going to have then back at the corporate office is a champion that feels you, that understands you, that knows your pain, your story. And then all of a sudden, you never know when a meeting's going to happen where all of a sudden the supply chain guy steps up and goes, no, 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 we can't do that because this is going to screw this thing up. And they're going to be like, how did you know that? And you're like, well, I was in the field last month, right? And I saw this firsthand.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Having people internally who can say, "Hey, I know that, Joe Smith has this lifestyle requirement because Joe Smith has this long commute to his first client, and then his first client always demands this, and then he has to run and pick this up." Right? Like understanding the burden and the lifestyle and the work that these people are doing, I think is really helpful, and especially in the context for us, at least in mobility benefits, because it's really about making sure that the team is not only enabled with competitive and fair practices to make sure that they can get their job done and they're being paid fairly, but also mobile tools that enable them to do it faster and better. Right?
Yeah.
It's So how do you know that if you're not in the field? How can you understand?
No, there's so many little things that happen like that, right? Like that it's kind of, and this is another like classic kind of HR failure of like saying, well, we have to do the same thing for everybody. And actually you don't. There's no law that says you have to do the exact same thing for everybody. Now, again, depending on where you're at in different positions and blah, 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 like I can't, like, let's say you and I are in the exact same position. I can't say, oh, I'm going to pay Tim way differently than I'm going to pay Lee, blah, blah, blah. But like from a, if Lee goes, hey, I'm on the road and I have this thing and I'm constantly using my own personal credit card to pay for this or whatever. And Tim is like, well, I'm not. You can't go, well, we're going to give Lee this benefit and Tim, we're not. Yeah, you can. You can. There's no issue with that, right? And like we so often we're just like, we go like, well, if we can't give it to everybody, we can't give it to anybody. And you're just like, no, that is not the case. Like figure out who needs this stuff, take care of them. And then if somebody comes, like the constant thing that we see, like we would have this, like going back to like the talent of being in the field, we would have somebody in the field that would be like, look, I you know, my kid just started doing this thing. It's on Saturday mornings, and like, we, and like our field leader, like executives, would be like, nope, we can't. You have to work Saturday mornings. Everybody works Saturday mornings, and they would go and then work for Chili's or Olive Garden or whoever, and we would lose great talent. And finally, somebody came in and was like, why are we forcing this? What if that person's willing to come in on Sundays or work extra some other time or whatever? Like, and because the whole idea was, well, if we do it for Tim, everybody's going to want to take Saturday morning off.
Right.
And then so we actually went out and did the study, again, going back to like data and testing and really understanding what's the reality versus what's our perception of reality. And we found out that like less than 5% of people wanted to take Saturday. Like people they already had their life. People were like, no, I work Saturday mornings, but then I take Sunday, Monday off. And I love having Mondays because it's quiet. I can get all my stuff done versus on the weekends where everyone's trying to pull my time. And like so many people like have that. I was working with a manufacturing client, same thing. They were like, Tim, we can't get people, like they were doing the 7 to 3, 3
right.
to 11, 11 to 7, like the 3 shifts. And they're just like, we can't get anybody to show up, for these shifts. And they kept losing people. And a lot of it was single moms who had to drop their kids off at school. And they're like, look, I can't get to the shift until 7:30. And so we were going out, we talked to the supervisors on the floor, right? The people that are doing the work. And they were like, no, I can arrange it. So I can have like Mary and Tina show up at 7:30. They'll be on this backside here, but then they get to stay a little bit longer so they can set up the next shift for better. And like, but the executives, HR person would never just go and have that conversation. Like, no, we only have 3 shifts and you have to show up here. And again, we go back and they're like, well, now everyone's going to want to show up at 7:30. No, they actually found out people wanted to show up earlier at 6:30. Many people just wanted to stay the same shift because it worked for them. And so again, it's about really understanding the reality. Everybody always thinks like if we do it for one person, then everybody's going to want to do that. And it's just not the case. It's just not. And again, it's getting back to almost like this personalization of talent versus like, how do we treat everybody? Nobody wants to be treated like everybody else. We all want to be treated like special butterflies and snowflakes. And, and sometimes we can actually do that without disrupting and actually making better, right, the entire operation.
It's so true. I think it's so not necessarily new, but getting more standardized to see this level of benefits that are more custom or more flexible, especially, when scary word post-pandemic, when people actually needed new things, right? Oh my gosh, shocking. We needed new things right after this huge world event. And the concept of actually taking into account real use and real lifestyle is so vastly different and something that a lot of people are still scared of, particularly in our world, right? We see people who might beg their employer and say, hey, I know you're giving me a company car. I would way rather have a tax-free car allowance because I have a car and I can't afford to park both, or my family doesn't need it, right? And then there's employers who are thinking, well, what will happen if I make the change? Will it start a fuss, right? And so I'm curious to hear, because this is one of the biggest questions we get. People who are like you, who are change makers, they're hungry and they see something and they say, I need to get this flexible benefit applied. How the heck do people get cross-functional alignment between finance, sales, operations to actually jump on something that might be vastly different for a lot of folks?
Yeah. So again, I go back to the testing thing. I think this is a perfect example of how you use this as a test, because what you find, finance only wants what's best for the company. And again, that means a lot of different things, right? Because what's best for the company could be higher revenue, higher margin. It could also be, hey, because we have longer tenure now, we have better performance, which equals more
Right.
revenue, more margin, because you don't have to use, all the resources because now you have brain power or whatever. Um, and so I always find like finance is the easiest one to talk. Technology people like potentially right are like sometimes they're just like, look, this doesn't work with our infrastructure, this doesn't work, whatever. But for the most part, with the today's world of SaaS and open APIs, like all this stuff can happen. Um, and then like operations was what's best for the operation. Again, it goes back to how do we keep our people engaged? How do we keep them here longer so that we don't have to continue to go through this kind of like cycle of trying to get new people and teach them and, all the other stuff that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to go in there and saying like, look, here's a real ROI. I don't, not an HR ROI, because sometimes we go in and try to sell like HR software or technology, and we're like, if you just do this, you're going to get a 3% higher tenure, and it's going to equal $45 million. And the CFO just wants to punch you in the face. Like,
Yeah.
like you have no idea what you're talking about. And a lot of it's based on like these weird numbers of like how much does it cost to actually replace an
Mm-hmm.
employee. So like let's say you had $100,000 field employee, like most like academics would say it could be 1 to 1.5 times that person's salary to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
No executive believes it costs 100 to 150,000 to replace
Right.
somebody. Now, I could actually go through all the math of training, loss of an experienced person to margin, blah, blah, blah. I could actually create a math equation that showed them it actually might cost that much. But to them, it's such a soft number. What I love to do is go back to the executive and say, hey, look, if we do this, if we offer this benefit, we think we can actually increase tenure by
Mm.
whatever. What do you think it costs us to replace a salesperson in the field? And they're going to come up with a number. Maybe, let's say they go
Right.
25,000. So it's a quarter of what the reality is. 25 grand is still a giant number to measure and say, okay, well, if we do this, then if we bring in this benefit and we truly believe that we're going to extend, tenure by, let's say 6 months, whatever, and we're going to save, that saves us 50 hires for the year. That's still like it's still millions of dollars
Right.
that we're going to save. And that's to now it's not your HR math. This is like your finance person going, this is what I believe in. Right. So for me, it's always going back to figuring out what do they actually believe in? Like trying to figure out what the real numbers are in their head, even though none of this is real numbers, but like we see this with like marketing all the time, right? Marketing comes in and goes, oh, if you give me 15% more budget, I'm going to give you
Right.
20% more in revenue. And every year they fail, and every year they come back and ask for more revenue. HR is the exact opposite. They're like, well, if you give us 3%, we could do this. You're like, no, give us 7%. The next year, give us 5%. And we're constantly
Right.
cutting, thinking somehow we're going to have better people practices. And you're like, no, that's not how this
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. Such a unique perspective and actually so true because everybody's under budget constraints. HR is no different. But I like how you mentioned almost like this framing of each independent department's business case,
Yeah.
because HR motivations typically, of course, are retention, happiness, satisfaction, hiring efficiencies, all of these things. And finance is not uniquely different. They just have a different context, right? Like they're looking at it differently. So I love how you mentioned speaking their language and saying, okay, I'm just going to ask them straight up how they would evaluate success of this. And then I'll figure out if I can get to a point where we're in alignment, because it seems like most of the time you naturally would be. Everybody wants what's best for the
Yeah.
business.
Most people don't understand organizational dynamics around
Right.
finance. They believe that the CEO and the CFO know everything. They're all knowing, and they decide who gets the money because they know better than everybody. In actuality, the CFO gives money to who they trust and believe is actually going to use it the best for
Mm-hmm.
the betterment of the company. And usually the CEO is looking at the CFO and they're kind of like, so do you think like Tim actually like what he's talking about is real? Like and then they're
Yeah.
like, okay, yes, we'll give it to him. And so often though they just don't trust that HR knows how to spend the money the wisely, right? And part of that gets back to what I think we ask the vendor to give us an ROI, and this vendor wants to make sure they have a great ROI, and they give us this make believe HR math, and then we look like idiots in front of the CFO instead of going in and like building the business case in front of them where they're a part of it. And all of a sudden they're like, oh crap. Like at the end of the time, they're just like shaking their head like, yeah, I think this is the thing. And I think this is how much money and it's going to save us. And then we'll see. We'll measure it at the end of the year. We'll come back and talk about it.
Yeah. Such a good point. Such a good point. Yeah, like having something that's measurable, having a strong case. And I'm curious to hear your perspective, right? Because you've seen a lot of technology, you've been in technology, you have this experience from both sides. So how do you recommend that leaders leverage things like their tech partner to help them build a business case? Because I often, to share a personal anecdote, I often find that some leaders are very hungry to collaborate. They want to use your expertise because you do this every day and like you understand the business case. And others are like, okay, let me do this by myself. I need to figure it out. I need to be a subject matter expertise, an expert in this. I need to develop my subject matter expertise. So how do you recommend that HR leaders leverage their partners to help them get there?
So like, I think the biggest thing that both, like, again, as HR leaders, we should be asking for, but also the vendor should just be offering up. If I mean, the more forward thinking ones will, I want to talk to three people. I want to talk to a current customer who's going through implementation. I want to know the real pain,
Mm-hmm.
right, of what I'm about to turn
Right.
on, because there will be some irritation. I want to know what that
Yep.
is. I want to know somebody who actually is a year out. It's already in, and maybe or maybe the person that's using you the best. So that's the person the vendor always wants to give you. Like, oh my gosh, Sheila loves us. Talk to Sheila. I want to talk to Sheila because I do want to know how good it could
Right.
be, right? And I want to know someone who left you in the last year, because I also want to know how bad it could be or why. And here's the thing: the vendor never wants to give you that person, but the reality is, what I find talking to those people constantly, what they usually actually blame themselves. Hey, we left this company, this HR tech company, but really we screwed up the implementation, or
Mm,
we did this. I learned more from them about how I'm going to make the tech successful than, but like the vendor's always scared that they're going to talk like, well, they left us and maybe they probably went to somebody else and they're going to talk us out of it. No, no, no. The reason I'm asking for the referrals is I've already made a decision that
right.
I want to use you,
Right.
right? What I'm trying to figure out is, how do I make sure that I make you successful? How do I make sure that I make my users of your technology super users, and have full adoption, and that we don't mess this thing up.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the biggest way that we could, have HR people like work with vendors better. And it's twofold, right? So it's one, kind of asking for that information, and you'd be shocked at how many vendors are like, well, we can't do that, or we can't like give you this information. And I always tell HR leaders, like, if a vendor says that, like, you just walk
Right.
away. Like that, it's not somebody you want to work with, because if they're not proud of everything they do, even the people that leave, and understanding, to me, this is like how the world has changed when we go onto Amazon and look at like reviews of products, right? Or we go to Yelp, or we go to Verbo and whatever. We always think like the bad reviews are the ones that we don't want on there. In reality, I can read through the nonsense of a bad review of somebody who's just kind of jilted or whatever, but also kind of within that, understand the reality, because I'm looking at all the other reviews in context of that as
Right.
well. So I want to talk to the good, the bad,
Yeah.
and see what's going on.
So true. I think that's how you develop true understanding, and that's also how you develop trust. Because
For sure.
a word is one thing, testimonials are another, but actually hearing all of the perspectives is unique, because no two companies are the same. I have never, in my many experiences doing what I do, seen two companies are the exact same or have the same goals.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because we've had a couple companies, that we had gone through the process with, that we had gone through the sales cycle and they chose a different vendor, and then, came back to us and said,
Sure.
look, hey,
Yeah.
we chose them for this reason. We didn't choose you for this, whatever other reason. And now we're realizing that we messed this up, not because of, could be because of us, could be because of other things, but ultimately they're like, we need to restart because we
Yeah.
messed this up. Just our implementation, just our decision making. We thought we could do it this way. We realized we can't. We thought we could try this. We realized, oops, people aren't going to like that, so we have to pivot now. So
I get a chance to talk with a lot of like kind of HR tech, like marketing
mm-hmm.
teams, or even their operational, like, just especially in the startup community, talk to really the
Right.
founders and the tech people, everybody. One of the things I love to ask them is like, if you went to a potential customer and said like, look, we're going to make this completely pain free for you. Like, if you sign up for a year, and at the end of the year, we have this conversation, and you go, you know what? We're not using it. Didn't work for us, whatever. We'll pay you all that money back. And I said, if you could get another 100 customers that would sign up for a year, would you do that? And it's shocking to me that people, because the companies that can't produce what they're saying they can produce, that's more vapor than not, when they're like, we could never do that. Why? If you believe your product is the right product and it's going to be sticky and they're going to use it for a decade or 2 decades or whatever, why wouldn't you be willing to give them a year and say, hey, if you don't want it after a year, we'll pay your money back? It's so like taxing for them to go crap because now you have to
Right.
prove, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a great exercise to go through with any team, because whatever you're doing, whatever you're selling, if you were to sell somebody that, you're just like, oh crap, like, can we actually produce and give what we're saying we can? Or are we just selling a line,
Right. Yeah, like how confident is a company in what their own value proposition and what they can achieve? And also I think it's really important for companies to work with their partners and develop a solution, whether that's contractually, whether that's a term, yada yada, a genuine partnership that works for them, because
Yeah.
everybody's on a different timeline, everybody has different goals, and that needs to be at the forefront, that flexibility, that trust.
Yep. No doubt.
Yeah. Amazing. So I want to pivot back into technology, because you're talking a lot about leveraging it and contracts and partnership, but let's talk about the importance of mobile technology as a whole. So
Yeah.
can you talk to me a little bit about how the day-to-day tech stack that a company leverages can impact its retainment, its hiring, and the satisfaction of employees?
Yeah, no, I mean, especially when we're talking like with the field employees, it's, for most companies, it tends to be a small portion of their overall employee
Right.
base, right? And so you tend to build a tech stack around the majority, which is your in-office, employees, or people who are going to be sitting in front of a laptop or a desktop all day long, versus employees who are on the road for the most part are going to be on mobile, and having, and what the problem is for like the last probably, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, we've kind of sold this kind of mobile optimized version, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh, we have this desktop world, but don't worry, it'll work for anybody with a mobile device. And I'm like, I always like trying to like, have you used it? Have you gone out in the field and then tried to make an employee change or try to do whatever you have to do as a field leader, try to put in your expenses or try to put in whatever, versus somebody that's actually kind of mobile
Mm-hmm.
first, and the difference in how that is and how that's used and just the look and feel, and the ease of that are completely different. And so, again, understanding, can we deliver a mobile first environment for those people who need that? And, can we actually, do we have, can we deliver both? And the hard part is we get sold by the desktop community, the kind of the, don't worry, mobile optimized is as good as the desktop version. And you're like, well, it might be if I actually have the desktop
Right.
version
Right.
that I'm using,
Right.
but I'm a mobile user and it's never as good.
Yeah, I love this point, because when we talk about technology, HR technology, enablement technology, there's a big realm of day to day use. So from the mobile side, we have things like mileage capture technology. You might want mobile access to your CRMs, your benefits platforms, and then you have the tools that impact HR ops people who are sometimes in the back end, right? Things like resume sorting, recruitment, performance management, right? So there's almost this need for both, and both need to
Yeah.
work simultaneously. Sometimes with the same people, and sometimes we're vastly different personas, vastly different types of people. So when you're looking at all of this noise, how do you go about ensuring that these tools are seamlessly integrated into day-to-day use to ensure that that's optimal? Because you mentioned
Yeah.
APIs, of course, is very common these days. So there's a tech side, and then there's also the you know the upkeep side, and ensuring that people are bought in and they're actually using it. So what are your
No, and like,
recommendations?
again, adoption is the hardest thing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you can have the greatest tools in the world, but if you don't get the adoption you need and that you're not using it, it's worthless.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this constantly. So there's a few things. One is, I think our failure in adoption is usually that we don't build our process within the technology. We tried to build a process around technology. So the classic example in my world, because I run a recruiting team, and I hear this constantly from TA leaders, and HR leaders, like, well, Tim, I can't get my recruiters to use our ATS, that's our applicant tracking system that we hire people with. And I'm like, that's not it could be a tech problem, but like they're all using modern technology. I'm like, that's not a technology problem. That's a you problem. You haven't built in touch points of measurement along the process in the technology where you go, hey, wait a minute. Like this is the thing. Like again, you can take a look at like I'm sure you guys like are looking at this stuff and working this stuff. Like imagine a field leader. Like I know when I was in the field leader, filling out the Friday expense report stuff was like a
Mm-hmm.
nightmare. And you'd have then leaders that would put it off for months and then have to go back. And again, immediately like our technology should be intuitive enough to go like, hey, Tim was on the road 3 days. He drove here, here, and here because it's following me with my mobile device. And I don't even have to fill out that mileage report, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, it should, or I can start it and stop it of when I'm on, like, whatever it might be. Like, it should be so intuitive and easy that I don't have to think about it. Because that's a tax on the field person as well that we don't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
The level of bad technology, bad process that we throw on field people, you're able to pull them away from like competitors so easy when they have a bad experience of that, when they know it's like, hey, I'm out here working my butt off. I'm out here up early. I'm on the road late. I'm on the weekends, whatever it might be. And yet I have somebody in HR yelling at me or somebody in payroll or somebody in AP or someone, saying stuff to me because I didn't do this perfectly or I didn't do this. And you're just like, nobody in the corporate office has to deal with this crap. Why am and again, it's,
So true. So
it's,
true.
but we've actually in the field have put up with it for so many decades that we just go, oh, that's just part of the field job. Why is it like it doesn't have to be? There's no reason for this. And I think again, the companies that get it best, it's usually what you find is there's a leader either on the operations side or even the executive like C-suite side who spent a big portion of their career in the field, and they actually know the pain, they actually know the frustration, and they're just like, look, how do we make their lives easier and not continue to jam our processes on them versus processes that actually work for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think that comes back to, of course, like providing appropriate tooling, but then also flexible tooling to our previous
Yes.
conversation, so I'll give you an example in our world. You
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah.
mileage, end of the week mileage. People before doing or switching to some of the tools that we have sometimes spend an extra week and a half of work per year just on mileage, just manual mileage capture, manual mileage tracking. And it's such a waste because there's such beautiful tools that exist to actually straight up remove that pain fully.
Yeah.
But even the nature of, you mentioned you've got people who want to start and stop it. You've got people who want to use a schedule. You have people who want to look at it every single day and people who never want to touch it. And that depends
Yeah.
on their style. It depends on, their personality, and it depends on their work. And so we've applied things flexibility wise that enable different features to be applied to people who want to use them in the way that they want to. In addition to things like auto submit, which makes it easier where people don't have to forget to get that mileage
Yeah.
paid, which ultimately makes them turn to competitors.
It gets back to that personalization of tool and tech, right? Of like, we're getting closer and closer to that, where it's like, hey, we have this one technology and everybody has to use it, whether you hate it or love it, doesn't matter. And across the spectrum, you'll have all those, right? Versus going, hey, here's technology, and like, how do you want to use it? And if it works for you, amazing, because that's exactly what we want to have happen. If it doesn't work for you, let's figure out why, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just have, 10% of our employees are just, they're going to bucket anything.
Right.
So you're never going to make 100% of people happy with the tech and the process you choose. Part of it is to dig in and figure out what's going on really, in understanding like, why is this, especially when you have so many levels and variation of option you give a
Right.
person, like, why isn't this working for you? And sometimes just like they're old school or whatever, and they're just like, well, this is how I've always done it. And they're just habit. And it's like, okay, I get it. You have a habit, and now it's hard to break a
Right.
habit, and you're going to be upset by this, but it is what it
Yeah.
is.
And that goes back to change management and like making sure there's appropriate tooling, flexibility. Now, in your perspective, Tim, how much customization is too much customization? How many options are too many options? Where's that sweet spot between understanding what's truly important for your employee population and providing that effectively?
Yeah, I think 0.0001 customization is too much customization. I think customization is the death of great technology. You have companies that build amazing technology, spend millions of dollars, millions of man hours building great tech. And then we come in and say, hey, we do it this way. Can you break your
Right.
tech? And guess what? They need you to buy the tech. So they're like, hell yeah, we'll kill our tech. We'll break it for you. And then after the contract is up, you're like, this tech sucked. And you're like, well, you don't use it the way we designed to use it. You broke it. And you're like, well, why'd you let us break it? And like it sells all this back and forth. I For me, again, this is an HR perspective because so often in HR we ask for customization all the
Mm-hmm.
time. It's like, no, we need this box here instead of here. And you're like, why? Well, because it's always been here. It's
Right.
like, no, it doesn't. It does not. Um, my thing is always use the technology exactly how it's designed. Go through and actually try it. And if it gets 85, 90% of the way there, then you need zero customization, right? You don't need it. If it doesn't, then that's not the product for you.
Mm-hmm.
Go find another. There's one out there that will get you to that 85, 90%, if not
Mm-hmm.
more, of where you need to be from a process standpoint. Stop asking SaaS software to break their software for you. It is not how it works. And you're going to be unhappy. They're going to be unhappy, but they'll cash your check and then you'll go find something else. Like use the software the way it's designed to be. And again, test it, try it. At the end of the day, again, a lot of, like you said, it gets back to it's going to be different, right? But you might find out a year down the road is actually better. And that's what usually you find. Or that the field might go, well, it's no better or no worse. But for everybody else, it was great. So it's like, okay, great. Like if it works for them, like I don't think we can always also go back out and always think like the field's going to go, this is the most amazing thing you've ever done. Because at the end of the day, it's like, this is just part of the job. It's part of the process. It's part of what they do. Can we make it easier for them? Or every change we make, can it be non-added work to them? Like that's even better. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a different way of measuring success. Like, it's just different. Guys, it's okay. It's a process change. We're going to see some improvements here. We're going to see some improvements there. Like taking a deep breath and just understanding
Yeah.
it's okay if we just
Do you
see
know
impact.
the one HR tech process that changes constantly for companies that no one complains
What?
about is
Mm,
payroll? Because all they care about is their check
yeah.
shows up. They don't care if you're using Paycor, Paylocity, Paycom, Pay whatever, right? All the pays,
So true.
ADP, like you can use a million as long as their check shows up and they can like pull it up on a thing. They never complain. They're like, wait a minute, I like Paycor. So they don't even know. They're just like my paycheck showed
Right.
up. And so it's like it's so funny is like that what we complain about or not complain about in terms of process technology, operational technology that we use in all of our business. We tend to change out all kinds of systems and come up with better things, or at least just a new thing. Maybe it's a money savings, maybe it's an operational savings. That stuff it just happens. I have very little appetite to talk to people who are just like freak out about like using new technology because it's like, look, you have to give it a
Mm-hmm.
year and then let's talk about it then.
Yeah, it's so true. It's the same as when a new app drops or a new website comes out, and you learn how to use it, and you pivot just like we all
Yeah.
do. And every time
Yeah.
there's a new technology, which seems like every
The
day.
iPhone button.
Yeah.
Remember the iPhone, like losing the iPhone button? Oh, I
Oh
hated
yeah.
that. Like, I don't know. I need my button back. We all freaked out. I don't even know how to use the button now. I would never, if it would come, I'd be like, what is this for? Why do I have a
Yeah,
button? Like,
when
I
I can
don't,
just swipe. Oh, I remember the first time I had to swipe on that phone. I was so scared. And then whatever it takes a year for some, 2 days for others, 30 minutes.
oh,
Like
yeah.
it.
Yeah. The end of the week, you didn't even know. You couldn't remember there was a button. Like, I
Exactly.
don't,
Yeah, you just reminded me for the first time in years. I literally forgot.
no one remembers
I
the button.
know.
It's like, we couldn't live without the
No,
button.
and you know what? It's so funny. I love how you mentioned like use the technology as designed, and I think for very very specific use cases where nothing exists yet. Okay, sure, go on your customization journey, do it. But when you have a team, a trusted partner who spends a lot of time on research, development, user experience, design, they've probably gone through this a couple times and might
Yeah.
have best practices to share that you can maybe leverage for your company, right?
No, that's why I go back to like I want to talk to one of your customer that uses the tech like they use it better than you ever thought somebody could use
Mm-hmm.
it because there's a difference between customization and
Right.
configuration, right? I want to be able to I want to call something what I want to call it. That doesn't change it doesn't break the technology. So I want something that's configurable, but I don't need to break it. And then I want to talk to that person that's the best because like they figured out how to use this and I'm like I'm just stealing that process and I'm going to put this in place because if it works for them, it's probably going to work for us.
Yeah, yeah, so true. Now, as we kind of wrap up this conversation on tech, I want to talk about the biggest word on everybody's lips these days, and you're not going to be surprised by what I say, but of course, in the realm of software and technology, and these tech companies, AI is everywhere. There's a lot of active projects underway that expand its use, but for a lot of companies with field teams, CPG, food and beverage, pharma, oil and gas. Some of these companies are a little bit behind. Others, they're using it for predictive SKU analytics. I know that when I used to work in CPG, I used it for predictive SKU analytics, which was awesome, but it was still very much a buzzword. So, how do you advise HR leaders who are in these industries to begin effectively leveraging AI tools? Where do they start?
First is the realization that they've been using AI for a decade.
Mm,
Most of them have no idea.
yeah.
And I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, 350 people in the audience, and I said, raise your hand if you use AI every day. 6 people out of 350 raised their hand. And then that was the realization. And it said everybody should have raised their hand. Do you use your mobile phone?
Mm,
Do you use your Microsoft Office, your Google spreadsheets, all this other stuff, right? You're using AI every single day. It's layered into the systems and process you use. You don't get it.
mm,
And everyone's like, oh, but we're talking about different AI. No, no, no. It's just AI. It's going to be layered into the technology that you use. I always tell people like 99% of us, like AI is a non-issue for us. It's the same as like any of the other stuff that we used, that when technology, like, again, I always tell people like most of us, we can't remember not having this. I always ask people like, can you remember not having a cell phone? People are like, yeah, I do. You're a liar. No, you don't. We can't even get this. If this thing is like 3 feet from us, we start to freak out,
true.
right? And yet there was an entire like generations of people that never had a computer that was constantly attached to them that they could use, right? And AI is not going to happen like a light switch. It happens little by little. It happens feature by
Hmm.
feature. And one day you wake up and your curtains automatically come up and you can smell the coffee and you have coffee there because AI already ordered it from the grocery store who delivered it by a robot. Like, I mean, like, and you go, oh my gosh, like I don't ever remember not living
Right.
like this,
Right.
but you did. And so I'm always like, one is this realization of you've been using AI, you're going to use AI. I go back to like the testing thing. What I always tell people is like, the vendors that you use that from an HR tech perspective, I want to have specific conversations about like tell me your ethical AI statement. I want to know that that's actually, and if they go a what, I'm like, again, I'm probably like, hey, I need to use somebody else
Hmm.
from a technology perspective. And I want to know their roadmap for AI. I want to know how they're building this out, what they're thinking about, how they're using, the data that we have and the LLMs, and are they using public data or private data? Are they building their own? Like, I just want to be aware so that as features start to pop, I understand that's an AI feature. They don't have to call it that; they'll call it something else because that's what marketing does. Um, but I want to be aware so that if my legal team or my IT team or somebody comes to me and says like, hey, what's going on here, that I can talk to them intelligently.
Hmm.
What I find, the worst people in our organizations right now around AI are legal. They have no idea what
Right.
it is. They put it all in one giant box, and it's this killer robot that's going to end society as we
Yeah.
know it. And that's how they think of it. And they don't even know themselves that they've been using AI for a decade, and yet they're forcing HR to bring policies around AI. And you're like, did you, but 8 years ago, you never thought of that. You never thought about writing an AI policy, even though you were using it every single day. And all of a sudden now you're like freaked out by it. And you're like, I can't even, look at a piece of technology if it has AI. And you're like, it's just ignorant,
Yeah.
so educate yourself, understand what AI is, what AI isn't, understand that it's going to be layered into every single kind of technology we use, whether that's operational, financial, HR, sales. And for the most part, it's already layered
Right.
in, at least at the machine learning level, right? And more we're going to see it, at the AGI level. So it's like, how do we really understand kind of what this is and what it's not? I'm not afraid of it. But I also understand the power of it,
Hmm.
right? And where it can go wrong. So, to me, it's like just educate yourself.
Yeah, do a little bit of research, right? And I'll never forget my mom telling me stories of when the web and computers were all everywhere, and she was so scared, right? And it's so natural, but it's also we've been through it.
Uh,
We've been through it.
Lee, I'm going to date myself. My senior year of high school, I had like, the open house graduation party going to college. My parents bought me a
Oh,
typewriter. I took a typewriter to university my first year and never opened it because there was computers on
wow.
campus. And like what you're just going to type a paper on a computer. You're not going to type it on a typewriter. But like I was right there at that edge where it's like, oh, I can use a computer to do this.
Wow. See, so cool. I feel like we're almost at that edge now with AI. Like there's so many
For
things,
sure.
and you're so right. People don't even know that they're using it. And almost every modern technology is using it already inside of its
Yeah.
programming, right? And so I think that's such a great point. You mentioned educating themselves, asking good questions. I want to hear from you what questions HR leaders should ask themselves, apart from what you've mentioned, before investing in technology in general for their organization.
Around AI,
Around AI, around efficiency,
just around
around
tech.
technology.
Yeah. Um, Again, like I think it's difficult because I think it's a different question whether you're SMB, mid enterprise,
Good
enterprise,
point.
right? Enterprise HR leaders have a completely different line of questioning. One is you have to buy technology that's proven at the
Right.
enterprise. Like there's no way around it. Like you just can't be McDonald's and go, oh, I'm going to try this startup and hope it works. Like,
Right.
and then you have 21,000 restaurants fall down. Like you just can't. So like there's part of that where it's like, look, are you enterprise capable ready? And there's a lot of things to prove that, right? At the mid enterprise, you start to get to that level where you can still test some things, and try some things out. And then SMB, I think, is just, really has an advantage because they can go out and really try and test almost everything that's on there. The problem is everybody that sells technology wants the enterprise buyer, even though they might say, oh, we're for everybody or we're for the SMB. Everybody wants the giant check, right? They want the enterprise
Yeah.
buyer, but it's so hard to deliver consistently. And they're also the sales cycle becomes so long. So I think, as an HR leader, I want to know again, do they really understand the pain? Are they trying to sell me a solution for a pain that I didn't even know I had? So it's like, what do I even know? And like every time someone tells me like they want to change their HCM system or they want to change their payroll system or whatever that might be, I always ask them, well, what's wrong with the current one? And almost all the time they can't answer that question. They don't even know. They just know they want change. And then you go, well, I saw this other system feature. So you're going to go and do this entire changeover for a feature? Like, did you ask your other company? And like most of the time, the other company already has that feature. They just didn't
Right.
know. And they just didn't try to turn it on, right? So it's like really understanding what you need out of the technology, what you're not getting out of your current technology. And when you go through that, my other push to them would be, do you consider yourself a super user of your current technology? And if you don't, first become the super user, because that will immediately clarify for you what that technology has or doesn't have for you.
Right.
And so often they're not. They're just like, oh, well, my team doesn't use it, so I need a new one. Well, your team's not going to use the new one either. So like make them be a super user and then tell me what that tech doesn't have. And most of the tech we have within vertical, right, does 80 to 90% of the same thing. Then it gets into specific feature sets, cost, implementation, that trust factor of like, are these people going to help me deliver what I need to deliver? And do I feel like that's going to be the case? So I think those are the things you dig into.
Yeah. I love that. I love that perspective in closing of saying, look, you've got needs. The product probably does it. There's probably a ton of products that do similar things. The difference is, can the people you're working with help you through, help you implement, help you maintain, and effectively asking yourself, is this the right tech to support what I need? Enterprise level, mid-enterprise, mid-market, small business. I think that's such a good point. Now,
Yeah.
Tim, in closing, I want to hear from you because I had a couple of my colleagues who went to SHRM, saw you speak, which is awesome. A couple of them showed me your books, which are so great. And I want to hear how you stay so positive and upbeat all the time. What's your secret to staying so positive every day? And give me some.
It's so funny. When you talk to people, like you always ask, how are you doing? And like, for the most part, you're just like, fine.
Yeah.
Or I'm I'm amazing. Like my life's amazing. Part of it is like I get to do stuff I love to do all the time, right? I think I have, the greatest job in the world. I found out years ago that I had the skill of writing and
Yeah.
blogging, and it forced me to really kind of understand and interact with the audience and teach people. I've always wanted to be a teacher, and that was my undergrad. And so for me, it was kind of a natural progression to say, how do I help people do things better? And that actually gives me energy, rewards me when I know someone is struggling or failing at what they're doing, and you're like they read something you did, or they listened to you, and they're like, all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to try that, and it works. Because I think that's just like just a powerful emotion to have from that standpoint. So yeah, I mean, I think I kind of love what I do.
And why not?
And by the way, I understand that's super
Yeah.
rare. Like I hate the hustle porn culture of just do something you love. Like 99.99% of the world
Right.
can't. They got to pay bills. They got mortgages. They got kids going to school. Like you just can't always do what you love. And even when I was like in that position of having to pay the mortgage and pay the bills and have kids in school and all that stuff that you go through, I always found something within the job I have that I love, right? Whether it was working with people and trying to help somebody or whatever, like whatever that energizes you, try to figure that out. I never worked, to solidify my life. I worked so that I could have a great life of my wife and my kids and my family and the people that I supported. Right. So to me, work was compartmentalized of this gives me the leverage to actually have a great life.
Yeah.
Like all over.
Yeah. It's about really understanding what's important and doing what you have to do. And I love that, because for some, it's just getting the job done easily in a way that they're enabled, of course, and that they feel supported by their company, and just putting a smile on their face because they're there and they have a good life and they have a good family. And I love that perspective. You've been so amazing to have on. Can you please tell us and our audience a little bit about your most recent book and where they can find you? Because everyone's going to want to look you up after this, of course, if they don't already know.
Yeah, so the most recent book is The Talent Fix Volume 2. It was really written because after I started writing and blogging for like really every day for a decade, so many like questions from the audience come like, I need this, or how do you do this, or blah, blah. I'm like, oh, I'll just write a book. Turns out no one wants to read a book. They just want you to answer the question. But it's also the learnings of like from the talent acquisition side of like, what would I do if I came in? Like, so if you were a failing talent acquisition function, if I came in to run that, what would I do? Really from like ground zero all the way to the end. And then just a lot of learnings in there. And like Sherm has been a great partner with me on the publishing side, allowing me to get pretty aggressive. Like I talk about hiring more pretty people. I talk about the white guy's guide to diversity recruiting. I talk about a lot of stuff that I think will challenge people and how they think. And then, like, again, you could find me at timsackett.com. You can just Google Tim Sackett. Like, I have pretty good SEO over the years. There's a truck driver chaplain in Minnesota named Tim Sackett. I think I stole all of his SEO. I always tell people it would be amazing if I was the same guy, like recruiter guy during the week and then truck driver chaplain on the weekends. Cool. But unfortunately, I just stole all of his SEO.
Okay, great. Well, perfect. That makes it easy for us. It makes it easy for our audience. Tim, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to our audience, continue to drive safe, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.